Okay, so get this. 64.8, billion dollars. Gone.
Poof, just like that.
Vanished. Into thin air.
Ah.
That's the Madoff investment scandal, folks. Biggest Ponzi scheme in history. And listen, it's not just, Wall Street bigwigs. This thing touched everyone. Banks, charities, regular people like you and me, even celebrities, even royalty got hit.
Yeah, the scope of it is just, it's mind-boggling.
It really is. It's mind-blowing.
What gets me, you know what I find the most fascinating about this whole thing? How we kept it going for so long. I mean, Ponzi schemes, they're basically what? Like financial houses of cards, right? You pay off the old investors with money from the new investors. There's no actual profit.
Right. It's all smoke and mirrors.
Exactly. And eventually the whole thing just collapses. It has to. So how did Madoff keep this illusion going for decades?
That is the million-dollar question. And that is exactly what we are going to unpack today. We've got a whole stack of sources, articles, court documents, even some deep dives into the psychology of it all. It reads like a financial thriller.
Oh, absolutely.
Except it really happened.
It's crazy. And the central figure, Bernie Madoff, I mean, that's what makes it even more intriguing. This wasn't some, fly-by-night operator.
No, this was a legit guy.
We're talking former chairman of the NASDAQ, Wall Street legend.
Okay, so the guy who helped build the NASDAQ, the pioneer of electronic trading, turns out he was running this massive fraud under everyone's noses. How?
Well, to understand that, you gotta go back. Madoff's early career, it's actually a story of, ambition, real innovation. He starts in the 60s as a penny stock trader.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, think about that. From lifeguard and sprinkler installer to Wall Street, borrows money from family, starts his own firm, and boom, rises through the ranks.
So he's this self-made success story.
The American dream.
And ironically, his early wins, they're all about transparency in tech. His firm was one of the first to use computers for stock quotes, which helped lead to, the creation of the NASDAQ.
Exactly. He even served as chairman 3 times. It's almost like this split personality. On one hand, he's this innovator, right, pushing Wall Street forward. But on the other, he's this mastermind of deception.
So at what point does Mr. Transparency become Mr. Ponzi scheme?
Well, it's important to remember his legitimate brokerage business, that was actually very successful, especially the market-making division. But then there's this other side, the investment advisory part. That's where he lured investors in with this split-strike conversion strategy.
The strike conversion. Okay. That sounds complicated.
It is a bit, yeah.
Break it down for us.
Okay, so imagine you're trying to make money in the stock market, but you want to minimize your risk.
Okay, I'm with you.
So it's I don't know, trying to juggle while you're balancing on a tightrope, right? That's kind of the idea behind split strike conversion. You use options to hedge your bets. And Madoff claimed that this was how he consistently delivered these steady 10% returns year after year.
Wait a minute. Steady returns? No matter what the market was doing. I mean, come on, that sounds a little too good to be true, right?
That's what a lot of people thought.
Yeah.
That was actually one of the earliest red flags. Analysts started questioning Madoff's returns way back in the 90s. They couldn't figure out how he was doing it. Nobody could replicate his results. And there is this real lack of transparency in his operations.
Okay, so if the math didn't add up, how did he manage to attract so many investors? And I mean, we're talking sophisticated investors, right? Were they just blinded by his reputation?
I mean, reputation definitely played a part, sure. Madoff, he was a master networker. He knew how to make people feel like they were part of something exclusive, like they were in on a secret.
Oh, so it's like joining this exclusive club, and Madoff was the gatekeeper.
You got it.
I guess that kind of social proof can be pretty powerful, especially when we're talking, big money.
Oh, absolutely. And you know what? He didn't just target anyone. Madoff strategically focused on certain communities. He leveraged shared affiliations to build trust. So, he preyed on people's natural desire to be part of a group, to trust those who seem like them.
That's kind of, it's a little unsettling, isn't it?
It is.
It's like he was exploiting our own instincts to build trust, and then he used that trust to deceive.
Yeah, it's a classic case of affinity fraud. And it raises a crucial question. How could someone with such a high profile, operating right under the noses of regulators, how could they pull this off for so long? Were there any warning signs, any missed opportunities to, catch him?
You're not going to believe this. The SEC, the very agency tasked with preventing this kind of fraud, they investigated Madoff multiple times.
No way.
They even had specific warnings from analysts like Harry Markopolos This guy laid out the mathematical impossibility of Madoff's returns as early as 2000.
Get out of here. I know. That's crazy.
So you have these analysts, right? They're waving these red flags saying, hey, this has got to be a Ponzi scheme. And yet, it's like nobody was really listening.
It's mind-boggling.
It really is.
It's like they were looking right past the obvious.
Exactly.
And that's what makes this case so compelling. I mean, it's not just about financial deception, right? It's about the systemic failures that allowed it to happen. It makes you wonder, what other cracks are there in the system, even today?
So we've got Madoff. He's building this empire of deception, raking in billions.
Mm-hmm.
But how does it all come crashing down?
Well, like all Ponzi schemes, Madoff's house of cards, it was built on lies. It could only stand as long as new money kept flowing in. And then 2008 hits and everything changes. Yeah, 2008. I mean, that was like it was a tidal wave. It just swept through the global economy, right? Mm-hmm. And Madoff's, I mean, it was built on sand. It just couldn't withstand the force.
So the market crashes, investors are panicking, and suddenly everyone wants their money back. I can only imagine the chaos.
Oh, it was total chaos. And remember, there were no real investments to liquidate, no actual profits to distribute. It was all smoke and mirrors. Madoff was just shuffling money around, robbing Peter to pay Paul. And as those redemption requests started surging, his carefully constructed facade, well, it just started to crumble.
Yeah. He must have been desperate. What did he do?
Well, in a last-ditch effort to keep the scheme afloat, he tried to tap into his network. You know, he started reaching out to some of his oldest friends, his wealthiest clients, tried to get a bailout.
Oh, wow.
But the well had run dry. Nobody was willing to throw good money after bad.
It's like watching a slow-motion train wreck. You know it's coming, but you can't look away.
Yeah.
So what happened next? Did he just disappear?
No, he didn't disappear. Faced with the imminent collapse of his empire, you know, and the prospect of criminal charges, Madoff did something unexpected. He confessed.
He confessed. To whom?
To his sons, Mark and Andrew. Imagine the shock, the betrayal they must have felt. Their own father, living a lie for decades. A lie that had shattered the lives of countless people.
Oh, man. That must have been just a crushing blow. What did they do?
To their credit, they didn't try to cover it up. They immediately contacted the authorities. And on December 11th, 2008, Bernard Madoff was arrested. The news, it sent shockwaves through Wall Street and beyond.
It's almost Shakespearean, isn't it? The rise and fall of this Wall Street titan, brought down by his own hubris and deception. So what happened after his arrest? What about his victims?
Well, that's when the true scale of the devastation really started to emerge. We're not just talking about financial ruin here, though the losses, they were staggering. But, we're talking about lives shattered, dreams destroyed, trust, just irrevocably broken.
It's heartbreaking to think about the human cost of this fraud. People lost their life savings, their homes, their sense of security. Some were driven to despair, even suicide.
Yeah, it was a dark time. The Madoff scandal, it became the symbol of Wall Street greed and excess. It just fueled so much outrage, calls for reform. Regulators, lawmakers, everyone was scrambling, trying to understand how such a massive fraud could have gone undetected for so long.
You mentioned earlier that Madoff also had a legitimate brokerage business, right?
Yeah.
What happened to that after his arrest?
It was immediately shut down. Along with his investment advisory operation, authorities froze all of Madoff's assets, and they appointed Irving Picard as the trustee. This guy was tasked with the Herculean effort of recovering funds for the victims.
Recovering funds from a Ponzi scheme? That sounds like trying to find a needle in a haystack.
Oh, yeah.
Where do you even begin?
Yeah, it was an incredibly daunting task. Picard had to untangle this complex web of transactions, shell companies, hidden assets. He had to trace the flow of money, identify any potential sources of recovery. And it wasn't just about Madoff's personal fortune. Picard also had to pursue clawbacks.
Clawbacks? What are those?
So imagine someone invested, say, $1 million with Madoff. And over the years, they withdrew, like $2 million. Even though they might have been completely unaware of the Ponzi scheme, they were considered a net winner and therefore subject to clawbacks.
So even if they were victims themselves, if they happened to withdraw more than they put in, they could be forced to give that money back.
Exactly. It was a controversial approach for sure, but Picard argued that any profits derived from Madoff's fund, they were essentially fictitious, right? And therefore belonged to the pool of assets that needed to be distributed amongst the actual victims.
I can only imagine the legal battles that ensued.
Oh, there were many. The clawback process was incredibly complex and often contested. It raised some serious ethical and legal questions about fairness, the scope of responsibility in these kinds of cases.
It really highlights the ripple effects of financial fraud, how it can impact people far beyond the immediate victims.
Absolutely. And as Picard's investigation deepened, it became clear that Madoff hadn't acted alone. Others had played a role. Knowingly or unknowingly, they helped perpetuate the scheme. This included family members, employees, even some of the feeder funds that had channeled billions of dollars into Madoff's firm.
So there was a whole network of enablers, some perhaps complicit, others perhaps just caught in the web of deception.
Yeah, you could say that. And those who had directly facilitated or profited from the fraud, well, they faced serious consequences. Madoff's brother, Peter, who served as the firm's chief compliance officer, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison.
Wow.
Yeah.
What about Madoff's sons, Mark and Andrew,
Oh, yeah.
the ones who turned him in?
Their story. That's one of the most tragic aspects of this whole saga. While they weren't directly involved in the fraudulent investment scheme, the weight of the scandal, the intense scrutiny, it took a devastating toll. Mark took his own life in 2010, and Andrew passed away a few years later after a battle with cancer.
Oh, man. It's a stark reminder that the consequences of white-collar crime, they're not just financial. They can have profound and lasting effects on individuals, families, communities.
Absolutely. And as for Bernard Madoff himself, well, he pleaded guilty to 11 federal felony counts, including securities fraud, money laundering, perjury, and he received the maximum sentence, 150 years in prison.
Wow, 150 years. That's essentially a life sentence. Did he ever express any remorse for what he did?
There were conflicting accounts about Madoff's level of remorse. Some claimed he was genuinely sorry for the pain he caused. Others believed he remained detached, more focused on minimizing his own culpability.
I guess it's hard to gauge true remorse in a situation like this, right?
Right.
Especially when the scale of the deception is so vast.
Yeah, it's tough. It's a reminder that even when justice is served, the wounds inflicted by such a massive fraud, they can take generations to heal.
It's a story that really makes you think, doesn't it? I mean, if a Wall Street titan, a guy like Madoff, can pull something like this off, how can anyone be sure? How can anyone be sure it won't happen again?
That's the question everyone was asking after the bubble burst. How could this have happened? And more importantly, how do we stop it from happening again? How do we prevent another Madoff?
Right. What kind of safeguards are in place now that that weren't there before?
Well, the financial industry, they've made some pretty significant changes since then. There are stricter regulations now, more robust oversight. There's a greater emphasis on transparency.
So more eyes on the books, more checks and balances.
Exactly. But it's important to remember that no system is foolproof.
Right.
I mean, as long as there's greed, as long as there are people willing to exploit others for financial gain, there's always going to be a risk of fraud.
That's a pretty sobering thought. So
Yeah.
what can we do as individuals? What can we do to protect ourselves?
Well, the most important thing is to be informed. Understand the basics of investing. Do your due diligence. Ask questions. Don't be afraid to push back. And, if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
So don't just hand over your hard-earned money without, doing a little research first.
Exactly. It's your money, your future. You have a right to know where it's going, how it's being managed.
It's easy to get caught up in the hype,
Yeah.
especially when you see others making money.
Oh, absolutely. That's why it's so important to think critically, to question assumptions, and be wary of anything that seems, too easy or too secretive.
Madoff's whole scheme, it thrived on secrecy, didn't it? And exclusivity. He made people feel like they were part of something, something special, something hidden from the rest of the world.
Yeah, he played on people's emotions, their desire for wealth and status, and it worked. I mean, it worked for a long time.
Until it all came crashing down.
Yeah, and when it did, the impact was, well, it was devastating.
It's a reminder that financial literacy, it's not just about understanding the numbers, is it? It's about understanding, human behavior, the psychology of greed and deception.
Couldn't agree more. We need to be aware of the psychological traps, right? The ones that can lead us to make bad decisions, especially when it comes to our finances.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Madoff scandal, what's the biggest takeaway for our listeners? What can they learn from this story?
I think the biggest lesson here is the importance of skepticism. Don't be afraid to ask questions, to challenge authority, to demand transparency. And remember, if something seems too good to be true, it probably is.
Wise words. Well, folks, that's our deep dive into the Madoff investment scandal, a fascinating and cautionary tale that reminds us that even the most sophisticated systems, they can be vulnerable to human greed and deception. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay vigilant.